Hi, I'm Alex Willams of the New Stack, and welcome to the Pancake Breakfast Circuit. Pancake Breakfast Circuit for the New Stack analysts. Pancakes in a podcast, that's the recipe when we take it on the road. This week's show is from ContainerCon. I want to thank our sponsors Red Hat and SignalFx. Coming up on September 10th, you'll find us at Software Circus in Amsterdam for an event sponsored by CloudSoft and Apsera. Then it's off to Washington, D.C. for a pancake breakfast the week of September 14th at the Spring Conference, sponsored by Pivotal. Pancakes in a podcast. Let's get to the show. Thanks for joining us. I hope you can join us sometime for some pancakes. Pancakes in a podcast. Sometime soon. Okay, on to the show. You are listening to the New Stack Analyst Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Willams. I'm founder of the New Stack, and here at ContainerCon, great to have you here. The New Stack, if you haven't seen, is a technology site that focuses on application development and management at scale. And for this event today, what we really are trying to do is have a discussion about Docker and the container ecosystem, but where we are now, really that state of the Docker and the container ecosystem, and really wanting to try to get some thoughts from everyone out here about where you are with things. So I'm going to be walking around with the mic, asking questions and such. I'd like to thank our sponsors for helping make this happen. OpenShift Red Hat, Krishnan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Krish. I work for OpenShift at Red Hat. OpenShift is the platform as a service offering by Red Hat. It's an awesome platform. If you are a developer, you should be trying it out. If you are an ops guy, you should be deploying it in your organization.
Aneel?
Hi, I'm Aneel Lakhani. I work at a company called SignalFx. We're a startup out of the Bay Area. We make what we call an advanced platform for monitoring modern applications. It's basically a stupidly fast, large time series analytics system.
Great. And I want to thank the Linux Foundation for making this possible. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sam.
Yep, I'm Sam Charrington. I'm an analyst with CloudPulse Strategies and with the New Stack.
Well, great. So my first question is, I'm trying to get an idea who's here. How many people in the crowd consider themselves developers? How many people consider themselves operations? Okay. Who likes to think of themselves as working in the DevOps world?
Very entertaining.
And other. Thank you, Barton. Okay, so the first question we really wanted to get an answer to, and I'd like to hear from you guys, and I'll pose this question first: is can't we just say that Docker right now is the industry standard? Can't we just accept that?
Oh, I thought it is industry standard, but the thing is it's still early in the process. There seems to be few other good alternatives out there, and developers love Docker, and it also Docker the project, not the company. So let me make it clear, because the discussion we are going to be using Docker everywhere. So due to trademark issues and other things, let's differentiate between Docker the project and Docker the company. So I'm talking about Docker the project throughout this discussion. So the developers love it. I go talk to developers on the enterprise side, even they are excited about Docker. They are the last group of people to get excited about any new technology. And I've been speaking to the enterprise customer developers in different parts of the world, and they are all excited about Docker. So I think since there is no other platform independent alternative which could make portability easy, I think it is emerging as an industry standard.
So Aneel, your company is helping people understand how to monitor containers. What are you hearing from people, the customers out there, the community out there, and what was your impetus for choosing this path?
Yeah, sure. So specifically with regards to Docker, so we've been using Docker in production, like real life with people on an application that lives in Docker for more than 2 years now. But we also have people who've been hacking on Docker since its existence at our company. So our user base is people who tend to build distributed systems, are in a services architecture or a microservices architecture, and tend to be people who are hitting scaling challenges, so they have a need for sort of ad hoc and deep visibility into all parts of their application or stack. So you would imagine that this would be the primary audience for using Docker at scale in production. Only a minority of our users are actually using Docker at scale in production, which was surprising to me. Most of them are using it in dev through test and trying to figure out how to deal with Docker as a day 2 operational thing. Of course, that's not us because we use it all the time for everything.
Great.
But I want to say one other thing about Docker. So I haven't been hands-on keys as a developer in, I don't know, 10-ish years now. And the first time I touched Docker, I was able to get the entirety of our stack up on a bunch of Docker containers on my MacBook in under 15 minutes. So for no other reason, that is sufficient to say to me that regardless of whether anyone likes it or not, Docker is a de facto thing that everyone will use.
Right. So
I think I agree with Aneel on that. I think Docker solved the developer experience problem. And that's the biggest thing that was hurting. Containers has been there for a long time. I think they nailed the developer experience problem, and that changed everything.
So who out here, raise their hand and says they're a developer? Great. And who is using, who here is using Docker right now, who are developers? Great. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Great. Can you tell us what you're doing with Docker?
Yeah, at my university, I'm using it so that students, student groups can run their websites on our ACM server. That's actually what I'm doing right now while listening to the talk. Okay,
so what are your experiences so far?
It's really easy with all the pre-built stuff. Like most of the sites are just static HTML, so I pull the Nginx image and stick their content in it, and it just works.
So who else is using Docker here? Anyone raise their hands? Great. You just tell us your name and what you're doing and a question if you have one for the panel.
Sure. My name is Itamar. I'm working for a software startup in Israel. We're building a 3D search engine. And we're using Docker for running the search backend. It's a C++ backend. And it's not very easy to build a C++ based Docker-based backend. It's quite challenging, and I'm looking for someone who has experience with C++ Docker-based images to get some help with it. It's one of the reasons I'm here. So if anyone can help me, I'd like to pick your brains.
So what are some of the particular challenges?
Docker is supposed to solve the dependency hell, and it's not really doing it for us. It's like I feel I'm rebuilding the development environment within Docker, and it doesn't feel right because I'm getting very large images, and it's very difficult to move them around. It's like moving around VMs, which it shouldn't be. At least I don't think it's supposed to be like that.
So are you thinking maybe it's not the right approach, it's not the right pattern to follow?
Maybe it should be, but maybe I'm doing it wrong. I think the runtime should be minimal, but I'm not able to getting it to work properly with a minimal runtime. I'm able to getting it to work only if I'm getting the entire build environment within the runtime environment, which fills backgrounds.
Panelists, any thoughts on this?
It was a little difficult to make out the question and response, but I thought I heard him saying he was trying to get Docker up on a cluster for his application.
The challenges that I'm speaking about are rebuilding the development environment within Docker just to getting it to work and getting very large Docker images, which are hard to move around.
Does speak a little bit to the complexity, I think, that we are seeing, that it's not just so simple
I can respond to what I thought I heard, which was more on the deployment side, and really just raise the point that we talk about Docker as it's one thing, but it's really many things. There's the container itself, and it does sound like the issues that he's running into are with regard to the container format and runtime itself, but there's also a platform that is promoted by Docker, the company, as well as an entire ecosystem of tools that are built up around the container and enabling people to deploy the applications that they bundle up with Docker. And it's super early. It's very confusing for a lot of people that I talk to, trying to figure out what to use and how to make all these pieces work together. The thing is, like a Docker or the container space driven by Docker is still in the early stages. But if you're just talking about Docker, the container, probably it's a bunch of kids sitting in the basement, packaging some applications and pushing, playing around with it. But if you have to do it on the enterprise side, like you need more than just Docker. You need to have a secure host, because otherwise your application is not going to go into production. You need to have a way to sort of a reliable place to download all the Docker images, because there was a research recently by Banyan Ops, I think it's a security firm or something. They said that 30% of the images which they downloaded from the Docker Hub has some kind of vulnerability in there. So if you're going to download an image from a public repository and sort of going to tell your IT team that, hey, I want to deploy my apps which I built using that Docker image, probably it's never going to go beyond your laptop. So you need to have a reliable place from which you could download the images. Then comes the it's not just managing a single Docker image, it's about managing multiple containers. You need a proper orchestration plane, or you need something with which IT could manage all the containers running in their environment. And on top of it, you need to give your developers a seamless way to deploy their apps. So you have to take into account all these things before you could see Docker in production.
So, but we're essentially, going on 3 years, about 2+ years, since Solomon Hykes announced, Docker and told the world about it, and we've seen such a transformation, in this market now, and it seems like we're coming to a different point right now where, people aren't necessarily putting Docker into production, but they're at least thinking about it, right? And they're thinking about it at least, and they're trying to understand what those patterns are that they use. Should they be using microservices? Should they be using kind of a VM and container, environment? And that seems to be where there's still a lot of confusion.
Yeah. Definitely many people are thinking about it, but there are also few who are deploying containers to production. In the startup world, I have seen many companies. There is one company down the street called Shippable. Their business is entirely built on Docker. I think you guys are also using Docker in a big way. I've seen larger organizations like Amadeus and few others who are using Docker in their production environment. The thing is the use cases are evolving. Microservices is a very good use case for that, for Docker. I see it as a good way to encapsulate a microservice and push it around. If you're going to wrap a virtual machine on a container and run it on a container environment, it's like taking a legacy application and running it on public cloud. So it's a use case, but it's not an efficient way of using your resources.
Great. So anyone who in the audience said that they're in operations? Anyone raise their hand? Can you, are you starting to use Docker in production? Are you starting to use it beyond just containers? I'm curious on, from an operations perspective, how you're using containers.
No production usage yet. Still looking into where it fits.
What are you looking into?
How to integrate it with an existing environment. Like, we have a large amount of automation at my company, and how to integrate hosts that are running Docker into all of the accounting and auditing and stuff like that for existing virtual machines and bare metal machines to make them play nice together, basically.
Why are you considering it, though?
Less overhead, basically, than virtual machines. So trying to get better performance.
Do you have a question? Would you like to ask them anything?
No.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask the audience, ask the panelists about how they're using Docker or containers from an operations perspective?
For a second?
What's that?
So how about I just interject for a second? So like I said, we've been using Docker in production for more than a couple of years. We have customers that run our SaaS, on our SaaS platform, which is built entirely on Docker, entirely on AWS, split across multiple availability zones, et cetera. Docker is a thing, but to actually run it in production requires the same things you would have had, you need to run anything else in production. You still need some kind of scheduling system that tells resources where to go when you're splitting resources between things, whether it's in VMs or containers. You still need an orchestration platform of some kind that will deal with issues with the containers, spin them up, spin them down, add capacity. You still need a deployment system. If you're going to do continuous integration or deployment, we use Jenkins. You still need to configure software. You still need to configure containers. You still need to package containers. You still need to test containers. You still need to run everything through a test harness of some kind. And you still need to get metrics out of the damn things so that you can figure out what they're doing in real life. Like the problems of running real software in the world don't go away because you're using Docker or anything else. You still have to do all the same things we've always had to do. So it's not going to get any easier if you don't do those things.
One way to solve the problem is to take the abstraction to a higher level and use something like a platform as a service.
So Sam, we've been working on this ebook series on Docker and container ecosystem. Several of the chapters kind of address these kinds of issues that we're talking about here. What are some of the things that you're learning from talking to people and reading about and editing this series about the overall ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is echoing what Aneel said. It's a really broad ecosystem. There are a lot of vendors, both new and traditional, that are Dockerizing. Either coming out with Docker, ground up products, or Dockerizing their existing products. We're finishing up kind of an ecosystem directory that has over 100 participants that have some kind of Docker product. And so the thing that I keep running into is in talking to folks that are not in the echo chamber, so to speak, it's confusing. And it's still early. Like a lot of us, went through the same thing with cloud, right? We'd sit around in rooms like this and talk about, are people using cloud? Is cloud really going to be a thing? What do I need to do to get to cloud? And, it's the same, it's very similar, but happening a lot quicker. I was talking to someone at Docker yesterday saying that they're coming up on 1 billion container downloads. That's huge. And it's enabled by, a different type of market that we have here with social and all the, the things that allow technologies to spread quickly, but it doesn't change the fact that it's, that there's a lot to learn.
Eric, I wanted to bring a question to you because you were making an interesting point earlier about the two different audiences that you're seeing, here at this event and otherwise. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I'm Eric Windisch. I work at Docker as a security engineer. And I was explaining to Alex earlier that this conference has many kernel hackers and a lot of builders of the tools and ecosystem, that drives Linux. And as such, right, there's certainly a number of people, especially operators, who are concerned about deploying containers at scale and managing their data center, the kind of the cloud OS or the cloud computing model. And then we have, technologists who are simply, caring about the technology that drives containers, right? Many of us just look at a container and think, well, this is the isolation between different processes on the host. And our concern is, making that technology better, working with that technology, generally at a per host level, and as developers, concerned about that as opposed to the orchestration and scheduling problems that we have, at scale, right? We don't a PAS isn't a concern if you're just hacking on the kernel, for instance.
So what kind of question would you ask, the kernel developer here at LinuxCon that you're curious about?
I don't know if I would have so much of questions. I mean, I am on the Linux kernel mailing list for containers. I follow that closely. But I do see some issues where, it's sort of a model of the kernel generally, which is that it's a full disclosure model. I'm a security engineer, so this is kind of like, my stake in the sand, which is that the kernel is full disclosure, so if there are security issues, they're discussed in the public for a lengthy amount of time. So for containers, part of what we're trying to do is provide isolation. It's certainly problematic when we're discussing, the holes in that isolation in the public for 8 to 12 months at a time on occasion. It really, punches a hole in the model when everybody knows how to break it.
So Krish, one of the things that we were talking about too is trying to understand what the differences are between things, what the differences are between these different technologies. So for instance, Kubernetes and Mesos, right? Help us understand that a little bit, and what are your thoughts?
For an outsider, I would say Kubernetes and Mesos are trying to do the same thing. But if you talk to a Kubernetes person, he's going to say, okay, yeah, we are the orchestration plane, and Mesos could plug in as a scheduler there. If you talk to people from Mesosphere, they're going to say, oh yeah, we have a plugin model, and Kubernetes could be one of the plugins. So let them fight it out. I don't want to get into it. But the way I see it, I try to. So I do. I was doing statistical physics in the past, so I try to model everything. So I try to look at the application. For the lack of better term, I'll use application infrastructure operating system, where you deploy all your applications on top of whatever infrastructure you use, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, or virtualization, I don't care. So for the application infrastructure operating system, I like to see, I'm seeing Kubernetes as the kernel of that application infrastructure operating system, and Docker could be the file system, one of the file systems supported by it, and then on top of which you have other layers like platform as a service offerings, which abstract away various complexities in that operating system. That's the way I model it. That's the way I see it emerging. Right now, Kubernetes is emerging as a standard for orchestration, but there are others, including Docker's own orchestration plane, and Mesos, they call themselves as data center operating system. So it's an open game there.
Yeah, I generally agree. I think one of the things that is interesting from my perspective is where these tools are coming from. Kubernetes is coming from Google and is informed by their experiences managing applications at a very large scale. Mesos also has that's some pedigree in coming out of broad use at Twitter, but its legacy is more around high performance computing. And I think when you start to peel away some of the architectural details, there are differences in the way that they do things in terms of whether you have the degree of redundancy, the degree of decentralization that distinguish these two things. But I think the conclusion is they do similar things, and it's still super early, and it's yet to be fleshed out which one wins.
And there are lots of other things that do those exact same things that have been around for quite a while.
So who in the audience would say that what they're trying to understand, how to balance things between, for instance, virtual machines and containers, trying to figure out these things. I'm curious. We're trying to get an understanding of what the complexities are that you're facing, what the questions you have. Does anyone care to share anything about what they're learning or what they're trying to do?
I'm currently trying to set up a continuous integration platform using Kubernetes and Jenkins. So far, that seems pretty straightforward. The only difficult part I have is trying to figure out when we move past continuous integration and we need to move to networking the hosts to handle better load. There's some confusion I have about the proxies and the host networking and stuff like that for the nodes that host the containers.
So what are some of those problems?
There's just, I think Kubernetes is mostly, they have a solution for load balancers, like for the Google Cloud Engine, but when you're trying to run it on your own hardware, they don't really give you out-of-the-box solutions for that. And then just figuring out how to go about like giving access to certain ports on each node and things isn't that well documented, so that's it.
Yeah, so Krish, what are some of the areas that you see need improvement? You know, he talked about documentation.
Yeah, the thing is, if you start with Kubernetes, these are some of the issues you're going to face because it's still a project in development. That's why, like at Red Hat, we took Kubernetes and added a few things on top of it. We added a routing layer which will handle some of the, I'm talking about OpenShift, the product Red Hat offers. So we added a routing layer which will let you plug in any load balancer you want to use, which you already have. And also we are sort of working with Kubernetes community to support multiple SDN providers underneath. So these are some of the work we are doing. The idea is, as a operations team too, like you shouldn't worry about all the complexities associated with the newer technologies. We are trying to abstract away these complexities and give operations team an easy way to deploy these newer technologies. That's what we are trying to achieve.
So most of these orchestration tools, I mean, I'm mostly seeing from deployment and orchestration point of view. I would like to learn some of your thoughts about the governance aspects, whether it's a containers or application.
Microservices are the theme. I'm assuming you're talking about governance of services built on top of these tools. Okay, so I'm assuming you're talking about microservices in particular. So microservices are a cool way to deploy your applications, and a platform as a service is a cool way to abstract away the underlying complexities. But it does add complexities at the higher levels of stack. Monitoring is one thing which you need to take into account, and I think Aneel can talk about it more. But at this point, I haven't seen any governance tool or anything available there. Probably there's an opportunity for some of the people out here. So I haven't seen anything that could handle the governance of microservices. But for all the complexities underneath could be managed and there are some governance tools that could handle the underlying.
So how does OpenShift manage policies and such?
We manage the policies on the deployment level. We don't handle the governance or management of microservices. So we are a platform to deploy microservices. So we handle everything underneath. Probably Aneel could talk about how you can handle the higher order services.
There isn't a lot of governance out there. So I mean, governance is a large topic area. Everything from the provenance of the machine and the image and the contents of the image at the base level over through what's accessing the image. Is the image providing the correct software to the things that are accessing it or to people that are accessing it, and how do you route data? And there are a handful of tools here and there. People started to integrate TXT for provenance, and if you look at the work of companies like Apcera that are doing very detailed work around policy management and routing of people to machines and containers and vice versa, but I wouldn't say that you're going to find the same level of governance you would have found, for a vSphere environment with a bunch of BMC tools, because that does not exist yet.
That's right. Apcera has been doing something on the governance, but for that you have to use their own platform. So what we need is kind of a governance tool that could work across multiple underlying deployment platforms. So it could be OpenShift, it could be Amazon, it could be OpenStack, but we need a tool that sits on top and manages across multiple environments.
So throughout this discussion, there's lots of other factors to think about. There's there's kind of the operating system, and there's a lot of questions now about the future of the operating system and how Docker is changing it and kind of changing the scope of how we view the operating system. Sam, what have been some of the things that some of the observations that you're seeing out there about the changes and views about the operating system itself?
Yeah, so one of the interesting that's happening is the increasing popularity of these, quote unquote micro OSs or container OSs that are essentially, stripped down or minimal operating systems that really have the bare minimum set of requirements and dependencies that are required to run containers. And there are a handful of really interesting options. CoreOS, Red Hat's Atomic, VMware has Photon, Rancher OS, which is out there, has an offering in the space. So when you said that, I thought you were talking about initially this conversation of data center operating system. I think the term, operating
gets
system
confusing
gets
when we
a little confusing there. But when you're talking about the core operating system, what Docker enables around managing the dependencies and allowing you to bring the dependencies along with the application, enables us to really slim down the core OS, such that we can make deploys a lot faster and really feed into the efficiency of the whole model.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of Docker-based containers. Like earlier, when we were using traditional servers, like operating system was ruling the world, then virtualization came along and people started making claims that operating systems are irrelevant. Containers came and put operating systems at the center of the universe again. So now the question is, okay, for containers, you don't need such a huge operating system. That's where we are heading towards just enough operating system to run the containers. So
well, what about these serverless environments, right? So, with AWS Lambda, Parse, right? How are you guys, at SignalFx trying to think about how those environments are to be monitored?
Personally, I'm actually a big fan of things like Lambda and Parse. The concern, we're a company that is in the operations space. We provide a monitoring platform. Our users tend to be people who are engineering or operations or both. And what we found with things like Lambda or any other kind of system that's offered as a service and abstracts away all the underlying infrastructure is that they tend not to provide metrics about how they're performing, when they take certain actions, why they take those actions, how long it takes to take those actions, what the result of those actions are, and what the performance of anything is. So the way we approach that is we basically, for instance, we have the discussion with Amazon going about the kind of metrics that they emit from ECS and from other Amazon services that we can consume because our users are asking for them because they need to understand the performance of the underlying infrastructure and the performance of the entire stack in order to diagnose why their users are experiencing, for instance, a latency problem on an API call. And what tends to happen with abstracted services is they don't provide information.
So isn't that why we're hearing more about this application-centric architecture, Sam? What are some of the more interesting learnings you've had in preparing this ebook around this kind of whole new idea about an application-centric architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about serverless is the same thing that's interesting about platform as a service. It's raising the level of abstraction and allowing the developer and the folks that are operating applications to focus on the thing that they care about, the thing that's adding value, the applications themselves. And what we're seeing now is I think a shift in the definition of platform as a service in such a way that it's becoming less about a single monolithic stack and more about a collection of technologies that enable people to just deploy, to just build and deploy, and that comes in a lot of different forms.
Great, we have a question.
Hi, I'm from Qualcomm, product security. At Qualcomm, this is away from servers, but this is routers, right? And routers have been running OpenWRT, which basically everything runs as root mostly. Some don't, but majority of the user space runs as root. And now within our team, we're seeing what we can do to contain these root processes. And this is running on Linux. Probably they just updated to Linux kernel 3.14. So this is bare Linux. There's no containerized OS. What are our options? Do we really have to start from scratch, where we start looking at namespaces and maybe some seccomp BPF filters to control the syscalls? I'd like to hear your thoughts on something this raw and this old that nobody cares for. And we can't really ask those daemons to drop root because there are 3,000 of them and they're all open source. So at the industry level, we are looking at it and saying, what can we do from outside without changing that source code of each of those daemons? I mean, it's a very raw, basic problem.
I mean, the thing that comes to mind there is just the variety of things I've seen with people running containers on things like Raspberry Pi. I mean, so I think the model can be scaled down to devices, and people are excited about that for enabling the Internet of Things type scenarios. You also mentioned issues around the kind of security that's required to secure a device and profiling system calls and things like that. And I know that's an area that Docker is looking at very closely. Ed can maybe speak to that in more detail, but they're looking at ways to lock the container access down at the system call level so that you have a very fine degree of control over what the container is able to do.
So that's correct. In fact, actually, back to the point I was making earlier of the separation of concerns, we have really two things now. We have Docker, which is this toolbox, as Krishnan mentioned earlier, which we've enabled the developer, right? Like that's the thing that Docker's given us over just containers, is this ability, like this ease for developers to build and ship and run containers. And that's Docker, but also that bare container technology has been broken out into the container application standard, right, which is runc. So like in runc, we now have support for seccomp filtering, and that allows us to specify system calls and their arguments that we allow or deny. So we've integrated that in. We've integrated user namespaces as well. And these are some of the technologies that we're using to isolate the containers. And as those mature in runc, we're going to incorporate that into the higher level toolbox, right, and tooling, such as the Docker engine.
Well, great. Any concluding thoughts from you guys about where we are today and what you're seeing in the market and going forward from here at ContainerCon?
Well, containers are cool, but there are always questions about whether it's ready for enterprises. I think there are some of us who are working to make it ready for enterprises, and I think the use cases span from like taking care of developer experience to IoT use cases. So I think the next few years is going to be, next few container cons are going to be even more interesting than what we are seeing now. Like we're just scratching the surface. We have a long way to go.
Yeah, I think the fundamental driver here is around innovation and being able to iterate and thus innovate more quickly. And containers, in conjunction with cloud and the distributed computing technologies that have come up, has really set the stage for allowing companies to move a lot more quickly, and that's why this is taking off. And for that reason, it's important to at least start looking at it, experimenting with it, playing with it, if not putting it into production.
Containers are awesome. Ease of use always wins. Convenience always wins. Thus, containers win. I'm going to plug two short things. One, if you need a simple orchestration system, not one that's overly complicated, check out Maestro NG, M-A-E-S-T-R-O-N-G. You can just Google it. It's on GitHub. One of our engineers wrote it quite a while ago, before any of these other orchestration systems were out. And it's all you need is something simple that works. It does that. And the other thing is, if you're using containers in production and you care about operations and monitoring, check out SignalFx. It's built from the experience of people who have run containers in prod at the scale of many hundreds of thousands of nodes spread across the world, serving many hundreds of millions of users.
Yeah, I've got one plug to add as well. So Alex mentioned a couple of times this ebook series that the new stack is working on Docker and containers. And if you're interested in this discussion around orchestration systems, Kubernetes, Mesos, etc., we released a preview of the ebook series at OSCON. That's available on GitHub. So if you just Google GitHub, the new stack containers, it'll come up. And one of the articles there is a really interesting piece we did on container orchestration systems, and we list out a good 20 or so tools out there and go into detail on many of the popular ones that we talked about.
Since everybody is making a plug, let me make a plug here. Like O'Reilly recently released a book on Kubernetes. We are at OpenShift. We are making it available for free to you. If you go to openshift.com/promotions/Kubernetes, you'll get the ebook for free.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for coming to the Pancake Breakfast. Thanks to our panelists. Enjoy ContainerCon, and hopefully see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's show. Thank you very much for joining us. Audio editing and sound design for the New Stack Analyst podcast is provided by Broken Hours. You can find them at brokenhours.com. Thanks again, and hope to see you back at the show. Bye-bye.